In the dusty little town of Mbale, where the streets were always dry and the roofs of houses carried the weight of poverty, a young girl named Zuri walked with a basket of fruits on her head. Every morning, she stood in the busy market, calling out softly to buyers. Some people passed by without looking at her, while others mocked her for being the poor fruit girl. Children her age laughed at her torn dress, and women whispered behind her back, "She will never become anything." Zuri pretended not to hear, but deep inside, the words burned her heart. Yet even in her struggles, she carried a secret dream. Whenever she sold oranges or mangoes, her eyes followed the women from the city who came wearing bright clothes and fine jewelry. She wished she could be more than a fruit seller. She wished the world would see her for something greater than poverty. Her only comfort was her blind grandmother, Mama Adissa. Every evening when Zuri came home tired and sad, Mama Adissa would sit with her on the mat, touching her face gently and saying, "Child, don't let their words stay in your heart. Your destiny is bigger than this village." Zuri believed her, even when it was hard. She didn't know how or when life would change, but she held on to those words as tightly as she held her basket of fruits. In her heart, she knew one thing: she was meant for more. The rain was heavy that night in Bale. Thunder rolled across the dark sky, and the wind shook the small clay houses. Inside one of them, Mama Adissa lay weak on her mat. Her hands trembled as she called, "Zuri, come closer, child." Zuri rushed to her side, her heart pounding. She had never seen her grandmother look so fragile. Slowly, Mama Adissa reached under her pillow and pulled out a small wooden box. It was old, scratched, and looked like something most people would throw away. She held it tightly, as if it carried her last strength. With shaky hands, she placed it in Zuri's palms and whispered, "Protect this with your life. Inside lies the key to who you are." Zuri stared at the box, confused. "Grandmother, it's just wood. It looks empty," she said softly, afraid to disappoint her. Mama Adissa smiled faintly, her blind eyes shining with tears. "Child, never judge what you see. What looks like nothing to others may carry everything for you. One day, this box will speak." Zuri clutched it against her chest, though her mind was full of questions. What could an old, worn-out box hold? Why did her grandmother sound so serious, almost as if it was her last wish? That night, as the storm raged outside, Zuri sat by the fire, staring at the box. It looked ordinary, too ordinary. Anyone else would laugh at it. But the way her grandmother's voice shook, the way her hands trembled, made Zuri feel it was something more. She promised herself she would never let it go, no matter what others said. Little did she know, the old box she held close was not just wood and dust. It was the beginning of a destiny greater than she had ever imagined. The news spread through Mbale faster than the wind. By morning, every neighbor, every gossiping tongue in the market, knew that Mama Adissa had left her granddaughter an old wooden box. To them it was nothing but rubbish. They shook their heads and laughed. "Poor Zuri," they whispered. While others inherit land, cattle and money, she was left with firewood. Her greedy relatives mocked her the loudest. One uncle slapped his knee and shouted, "Can you believe this? A whole inheritance, and all she got was a box that can't even hold water." The others laughed with him until their stomachs hurt. Some even came pretending to show pity, only to peek at the box with sly eyes and leave whispering louder than before. Even Zuri's friends began to pull away. At first, they still greeted her, but soon their voices grew faint. One girl whispered, "Maybe she is cursed. Who gets left with nothing but a broken box?" The boys in the market mocked her openly. "Hey, fruit girl! How much for your magic box? Will it give us mangoes?" They burst into cruel laughter while she held the box close to her chest, pretending not to hear. Each word felt like a stone thrown at her heart. But Zuri did not let go. Every evening when she sat by the fire, she remembered her grandmother's trembling voice. "Protect this with your life. Inside lies the key to who you are." Those words became her shield against the shame. Still, when she lay on her mat at night, tears slid down her face silently. She wondered why her grandmother had given her something so strange. Was there really anything inside? Or was everyone right, that she was destined to live mocked and forgotten? Zuri didn't know the answers, but she made a quiet promise to herself. Even if the whole village laughs, I will not throw it away. One day, I will understand. What she didn't know was that the very box they laughed at would one day make them bow at her feet. That night, when the whole village was asleep and only the crickets sang in the dark, Zuri sat by the small fire in her hut. The wooden box lay on her lap, heavy with mystery. She had kept it closed for days, afraid of what she might or might not find inside. But the whispers of the villagers still echoed in her ears, mocking her, calling her cursed. With trembling hands she whispered, "Grandmother, show me what you saw," and slowly lifted the lid. At first, her eyes widened in disappointment. Inside there was no gold, no money, no treasure the world would admire. Just a few folded pieces of old fabric, a cracked leather diary, and a flat wooden token with a strange carved symbol. But something about them felt different. The fabrics were ancient, yet they glowed faintly under the firelight, as if golden threads were alive inside them. Zuri reached out and touched them, and in that moment a sudden warmth rushed through her fingertips, spreading into her chest, her whole body. She gasped and pulled her hand back, her heart beating fast. The diary was old, its cover worn, but when she opened it, the faded ink still whispered stories she could not yet understand. Strange drawings, patterns, and words filled the pages. And that symbol, smooth, carved with care, looked like it had once belonged to something powerful. Zuri did not know what it meant, but she felt it staring back at her, calling her, as if it carried a secret only she could unlock. Tears filled her eyes as she clutched the items to her chest. She remembered Mama Adissa's last words. "Inside lies the key to who you are." Suddenly she understood. The box was not empty. It was not junk. It was a path, a whisper of destiny waiting to be followed. That night Zuri did not sleep. She sat with the box beside her, staring at the golden patterns, the diary, the symbol. She did not know where they would lead her, but for the first time in her life, she felt the villagers were wrong. She was not cursed. She was chosen. The next morning, when the sun painted the dusty roofs of Mbale with its soft light, Zuri sat with the cracked diary open on her lap. She ran her fingers carefully across the fragile pages, afraid they might tear. Slowly, she began to read the words written long ago in her grandmother's hand. What she discovered left her breathless. The diary told the story of a forgotten guild of weavers, men and women whose fabrics were once sought by kings, queens, and warriors. Their golden threads were said to carry strength, wisdom, and protection. They were not just clothes, they were living art. Among those legendary weavers was her grandmother, Mama Adissa, blind now, but once a woman whose hands had woven dresses that lit up palaces. Zuri's heart raced as she turned the pages. Again and again, she saw the strange carved symbol from the box drawn in the margins of the diary. The words beneath it read, "This is the mark of the Golden Guild. Only the chosen may carry it. Only one with courage and vision can awaken its true power." She held the wooden token tightly in her hand. The carvings felt warm, as if alive. For a moment, she closed her eyes and heard her grandmother's voice in her memory. "Your destiny is bigger than this village." Now the words made sense. The box was not just an inheritance. It was an invitation. But the diary also spoke of trials. It said that the fabrics and the mark were sleeping powers. To awaken them, the bearer had to face failure, humiliation, and fear, and still rise. Only then would the golden threads come alive again. Zuri's stomach knotted with both fear and hope. She was just a poor fruit seller. How could she carry such a heavy destiny? How could she, mocked and forgotten, walk the path of weavers who once dressed kings? Still, as she pressed the diary to her chest, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time she wasn't just Zuri, the girl with torn clothes. She was Zuri, the granddaughter of Mama Adissa, a child, chosen by destiny. Her test had begun. Zuri no longer looked at the box as junk. Every morning after selling her fruits, she rushed back home, lit her small oil lamp, and opened the diary. The words became her teacher, and the old fabrics became her classroom. With trembling hands, she threaded a needle and began her first stitches. The cloth slipped, the thread broke, and her fingers bled, but she refused to stop. Her first attempt was crooked and ugly. The villagers laughed when she carried it outside to test in the light. "Look at Zuri," they sneered. "She thinks she is a queen's tailor, but her cloth looks like a sack for yams." Their laughter stung like knives, but she remembered the diary's words. Only through failure will the golden thread awaken. So she wiped her tears and tried again. Day after day, failure greeted her. Some days the fabric tore. Other days her designs looked messy. Children passed by her hut chanting, "Fruit girl with her ragged cloth." Even her relatives shook their heads and muttered, "She is wasting her time." But Zuri held onto her grandmother's voice, echoing in her heart, "Child, your destiny is bigger than this village." With every mistake, her hands grew steadier. With every tear she shed, her vision grew clearer. The more she practiced, the more the threads began to shimmer in her hands, as if slowly waking from a long sleep. Weeks turned into months. Her hut, once filled with only fruits and silence, was now alive with scraps of fabric, broken needles, and endless trials. Yet something magical was happening. Her stitches were no longer crooked. Her patterns began to flow, forming shapes and designs that no one in Bale had ever seen. One evening, as she held up a finished piece to the lamp, the golden threads sparkled softly, glowing against the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. She whispered, "It's happening." The same villagers who mocked her still jeered when they saw her carrying her cloth. But Zuri no longer bent her head. She had discovered something they could not see. Every stitch was not just fabric, it was a step toward her destiny. Her struggle was no longer her weakness. It was becoming her strength. Her test had begun. Enugu City was alive with music, drums, and laughter. The grand annual wedding festival had arrived, a day when brides from rich families showed off their gowns, tailors competed for fame, and nobles searched for new designs. People traveled from far villages just to witness the beauty and glory of the celebration. Zuri had never stepped into such a place before. Her heart pounded as she walked through the gates, clutching her small wooden box against her chest. Inside it lay the gown she had stitched for months, woven with golden threads that shimmered whenever the light touched them. The villagers who saw her leaving Bale had laughed. "You," they mocked, "going to Enugu with your ragged box. They will laugh you out of the city." But Zuri walked on, carrying dignity in her steps. When she entered the festival grounds, the brides dressed in silk and jewels turned to sneer at her. "Look at her," one said, her voice dripping with mockery. "She carries her wedding dress in a box like firewood." Another laughed. "Maybe she came to sell fruits here too." Their words stung, but Zuri did not answer. She remembered her grandmother's voice and kept her head high. At last the moment came. Tailors and brides unveiled their gowns, one more extravagant than the other. Then Zuri stepped forward. People whispered, some laughed, others frowned, expecting failure. But when she opened the wooden box and lifted her gown, silence fell. The fabric glowed softly as if kissed by the sun. Golden threads ran through it like rivers of light, dancing across the patterns her hands had carefully stitched. The gown was not just a dress, it was alive. The crowd gasped. Mothers clasped their hands over their mouths. Brides who had mocked her stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in her life, Zuri saw admiration instead of mockery in people's eyes. She had carried shame into the city, but now she stood holding a masterpiece that no one could deny. And though her hands shook as she held the gown high, her heart whispered, "Mama Adissa, this is only the beginning." The festival ground was buzzing with whispers as Zuri held up her glowing gown. People could not take their eyes off the golden threads that seemed to breathe with light. Just as the crowd leaned in closer, an elder slowly rose from his seat. His hair was silver, his robe embroidered with age-old patterns. His eyes, though old, burned with recognition. He stepped forward and pointed a trembling hand at the gown. "Stop," he said in a voice that silenced the drums and chatter. Everyone turned to him in surprise. The elder moved closer, his gaze fixed on the gown and then on Zuri. With a deep breath he declared, "This is no ordinary fabric. Look closely, see this symbol stitched here." He touched the glowing pattern on the dress. "This is the mark of the lost royal weavers." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Women covered their mouths. Men leaned forward. The brides who had mocked her earlier staggered back in shock. The nobles at the front stood quickly, their jeweled eyes wide. "The royal weavers," someone whispered. "Impossible. They disappeared generations ago." Another voice shouted, "Could it be true? Could she be one of them?" The elder raised his hand for silence. Only the chosen could awaken these threads. For centuries their craft was lost, until today. "This girl," he pointed at Zuri, "carries their blood, their gift, their legacy." In an instant the energy shifted. The same people who laughed at her ragged box now pushed forward, desperate to see her closer. Nobles in rich attire rushed to her, bowing slightly as they begged, "Child, who taught you this? We must know." A wealthy merchant cried out, "I will pay any price for your gown." Another noblewoman clutched Zuri's hand and whispered, "Make me one. I will wear nothing else." Zuri's chest rose and fell quickly. Just hours ago, she had walked into the city mocked as the poor fruit girl. Now nobles and elders bowed before her, speaking her name with respect. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered in her heart, "Grandmother, they finally see me." The elder turned once more to the crowd and declared, "A legend has returned." And the festival erupted into cheers that shook the ground. Zuri's life changed after the wedding festival in Enugu. The gown she had revealed became the talk of the entire city, and within days, news of her work spread like wildfire across the nation. Messengers carried her name from palace to palace. Queens and noblewomen sent for her, eager to wear the glowing fabrics that seemed to hold both beauty and power. Leaders draped themselves in her designs, calling her the daughter of golden threads. Her little hut in Bale was no longer quiet. Carriages stopped at her door, and messengers arrived with gifts of gold, silk, and rare dyes, all begging for her to create something new. The very villagers who once laughed at her box now bowed their heads when she passed. Women who once whispered, "She is cursed," now told their daughters, "If only you could be like Zuri." The boys who mocked her in the market stood aside in silence when she walked through, afraid to meet her eyes. Her greedy relatives, who had once mocked her inheritance, could not bear the shame. They hid their faces when she appeared, unable to stand before the girl they once called useless. They had laughed at her ragged box, but now the world called her a treasure. Zuri herself remained humble. She still carried the wooden box with her wherever she went, keeping it close as a reminder of where she began. When she unveiled each new gown, woven with golden threads that shimmered like dawn, she remembered the nights of failure, the stings of mockery, and the voice of Mama Adissa whispering in her heart, "Your destiny is bigger than this village." Nations began to honor her. Songs were sung about her gift, and storytellers carried her name across borders. But for Zuri, the greatest victory was not the wealth, not the respect, not even the crowns that wore her gowns. It was the sight of her people, the same ones who once threw stones of words at her, now bowing in silence, realizing that the poor fruit seller had become a living legend. And every time she saw their faces, she smiled softly, not with revenge, but with quiet strength, because she knew the truth. Destiny had always been on her side. The sun poured through the wide windows of Zuri's new atelier, a grand space filled with glowing fabrics and gowns that queens now traveled miles to wear. But in the very center of the room, on a golden table, sat the small wooden box, the same worn-out box her grandmother had placed in her hands on that stormy night. Zuri often paused from her work just to look at it. The world saw her as a legend now, but she never forgot where her journey began. One evening when the room was quiet, she placed her hand gently on the box and whispered, "Thank you, Mama Adissa. You didn't just give me a box. You gave me a destiny." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, not pain. She could still hear her grandmother's voice in her heart, guiding her through every stitch, every design, every trial. And now that voice had become a legacy. Whenever people wore her golden gowns, they carried not just beauty, but the story of a blind grandmother who believed in a forgotten fruit seller. In time, both Zuri's name and Mama Adissa's name became legend. Children grew up hearing the tale of the daughter of golden threads, and the box that carried destiny inside it. Storytellers in marketplaces lifted their voices and declared, Never laugh at small beginnings, for inside the smallest box may lie the crown of a nation. And as Zuri stood in her atelier, surrounded by light, she smiled, for she knew the truth. Her grandmother had not left her with nothing. She had left her with everything.